Hi everyone, my name is Herka, and today we'll embark on yet another adventure in hardcore Minecraft. But as per usual, we've added a bit of a twist. In our previous hardcore challenges, we've managed to somehow beat the game without using some of the most fundamental mechanics of the game, such as mining, jumping, and crafting. However, there is another mechanic in the game that is even more fundamental than the previously mentioned ones, as it's a key mechanic for most video games out there. I am, of course, speaking about walking and running, which is something we won't be allowed to do in today's video. But the challenge doesn't stop there, as I will completely remove the key bindings for walking forwards, backwards, strafe left, and strafe right, meaning that we also can't use horses, swim, or row boats. This is to ensure the highest possible level of damage to be dealt to my already worrying state of mental well-being. But now you might be thinking to yourselves that this is a really unique, creative, and original idea, and that I am an absolute genius and an incredibly handsome young man for coming up with it. However, this wasn't actually a challenge that I came up with myself, as I got it as a suggestion from Matty. This means that he's the one responsible for the emotional trauma that is about to be bestowed upon me throughout this video. On a real note, I really appreciate this suggestion, so a big thank you to Matty. And as we always do for these challenges, I'm not going to be using any armor whatsoever, as my life apparently wasn't already hard enough. So sit back, relax, grab some of your favorite prescription medication, watch me struggle my way through this challenge. I started off by going into the settings of the game and removed the key bindings in hopes that we wouldn't accidentally use them and completely screw ourselves over. I then created our world, giving it an incredibly creative and witty kind of name, as I always do. But once we were done playing the waiting game, I spawned on a beach by a dark oak forest with no trees that I could reach. So I exited the world, intending to re-roll our seed. But now you might be wondering what my game plan is to tackle this challenge, and I had done some research. I learned that there were several mechanics that we would come to use in the different stages of this challenge. And when I say research, I of course mean that I had tried beating this challenge on several occasions and failed severely due to my lack of competence. But the first thing we would need to make an attempt at this challenge was to find a seed where we have a tree that is within the range where we can mine it. We needed a minimum of 3 logs, as that would unlock our first means of transportation, that being boats. But now you might be wondering what I intended to use the boat for, as we've not allowed to row it. And the answer to that is that we can place the boat down and get in it, which will allow us to move ever so slightly. I know, I'm an absolute genius. However, this wasn't the only thing that we were after, as we also needed to spawn close to a plains village. There are several reasons for that, which will become rather apparent a bit later. But finally, after having spent way too much time for my hyperactive brain to handle, we did manage to find a seed that checked off all we would need to start a real attempt. So I started to chop down a tree to craft myself a boat in order to proceed with the previously mentioned master plan. I then tried making my way to the village as fast as humanly possible, but rather annoyingly, I didn't manage to get there in time before it turned to nighttime. And to make things even worse, this village didn't have any crops, which was one of the main reasons we needed to find a plains village. So once I had made that absolutely calamitous and cataclysmic discovery, I had to go back to create a bunch of worlds to find another seed. After a few more world creations, we successfully found another seed that had a plains village in its close vicinity. So I repeated the same boat-based strategy as before, in hopes of making it to the village before it turned to night. But my dreams, aspirations, and hope for my future was crushed rather quickly, as we were, once again, forced to stand in a hole. Though I did manage to get my hands on a few pieces of iron, which acted as a minor silver lining to our situation. Once it had turned to daytime yet again, I finally managed to make my way into the village, where I started off enforcing a series of involuntary reallocations of resources, and those relocations came in the form of a bed as well as carrots, as that was the reason why we specifically needed a plains village. Based on the acquisition of carrots as well as its importance, I expect that some of you know what the plan was. The reason I needed to find a plains village was because they are the only villages where we can get everything we need to ride a pig. And when you're riding on a pig using a carrot on a stick, you don't actually have to press any buttons to move, making pigs the absolute best means of transportation in this challenge. I never thought that riding a pig would ever be useful for me, let alone OP. But here we are, and rather conveniently, Villages can generate with chests where you have a chance of getting a saddle, so I mined my way into one of the houses that can give you saddles and was sorely disappointed. This was actually a bit of a sobering moment as I came to understand how my parents feel when they see me. I then noticed that there were 2 leatherworker buildings, meaning that there was still a tiny bit of hope, but that hope was crushed just like everything else in my life. Since we didn't manage to get our hands on any saddles, we would now have to level up a leatherworker, as they always sell saddles on their highest level, so I made my way over to a nearby river and started grabbing as much clay as possible. I then made my way back to the village and put down a couple stone cutters as well as a cauldron, so that I could get on to everyone's favorite activity, that of course being financial exploitation of impoverished peasants. But as we had made a bit of progress with our previously mentioned degenerate and criminal activities, our leatherworker that we were leveling up pulled out an Uno reverse card by increasing the price of the item we needed to buy in order to level him up. So I made my way down to the river once more and grabbed some flint, seeing as we were going to need some to craft a fletching table. And when I made it back once more, the leatherworker's Uno reverse card had expired, meaning that we could continue to level him up, but he apparently had another one, as his prices went up again right after I had started trading with him once more. One of the masons then decided to force me to hit him by accident and got upset about it. I had a pretty hard time seeing his line of reasoning, but decided to not ask any questions. I then crafted myself a fletching table and grabbed some arrows and a bow off of our brand spanking new victim of our fraudulent antics. And when the night came shortly thereafter, I started pillaring up so that mobs could start spawning closer to where I was standing. The thing we were after was string, as we were going to need a stick for our carrot on a stick. After having spent some time killing a total of 3 spiders, I made my way over to their cadavers and found a spider eye from the first spot I checked. A villager then decided that he wanted to die. But as I was checking the other spots, I made the horrific and war crime level atrocious discovery that the only drop I got from those 3 spiders I killed only dropped a single spider eye and nothing else. So I waited for nighttime once more and utilized the exact same strategy as before, but this time I did manage to get my slimy and greedy hands on enough string to make me briefly forget about the general situation of my real life, which was very epic. We also got a piece of gunpowder, which was perfect as we were going to need some later on, and the good news kept coming as I finally managed to level up our leatherworker to the point where we could buy a saddle. So I bought some saddles, crafted myself a carrot on a stick, and went off to find a suitable specimen who would come to be the most overpowered means of transportation in this challenge. With that, we were officially pimped out to an unfathomable degree. However, there were still a few things that we needed in order to go to the nether. Even though pigs are absolute gigachads in this challenge, they are still a bit too easily converted into sustenance of the non-halal variety. This means that there was a rather big risk of our pig dying in the nether, and I could imagine it would be rather stressful having a ghast hurl his massive balls at me whilst I'm not fast enough to escape. So in hopes of avoiding having my cheeks experience a cataclysmic level of clappage, I thought it might be a good idea to get my hands on ender pearls, so that I have some way of escaping. But the only 2 ways of getting ender pearls in the overworld are by either killing endermen at night or by trading with a cleric. I'm not particularly keen on killing a bunch of endermen, as my lacking level of competence tends to cause issues in these situations, and at this point, I was almost 3 hours into recording, so I wasn't very excited by the idea of dealing with a bunch of endermen. There also weren't any brewing stands in the village we were situated at, meaning that we would have to go find one in a different village. So began our new mission of finding a brewing stand. And after a while, we arrived at another village, but this one didn't have a brewing stand either, which was rather annoying. So I just made a quick stop where I created a food crisis for the people who had charitably let me into their home for fun. I also decided to kill off their only protection from the bloodthirsty monsters who haunt and kill them, then continued the search for a brewing stand. But when we had finally managed to find our 3rd village, I noticed that this one didn't have a brewing stand either. However, it did have a blacksmith, where I found enough obsidian to make a nether portal as well as 2 diamonds, which was an absolutely insane find. So I continued the journey once more, and after a while, I came across a savannah where I managed to spot yet another village. So I rode in on my pig in an exquisitely glorious manner in hopes of finally finding a brewing stand once and for all. And this is where our luck turned, as we had finally found the brewing stand after having looked for it for roughly 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 1 second. I then got straight to work leveling up the village cleric to get the pearl trade. But as I leveled him up, he refused to sell me any pearls. So I did what's usually done in disputes over merchanting, that of course being to trap him in a boat and bury him alive. Once a new voluntary victim of fraudulent practices had emerged, I tried getting the pearl trade once more, and unlike the previous cleric, this one made the correct choice. However, in the process of leveling up 2 different clerics, I had become severely broke, meaning that I would have to go back to good old financial exploitation using clay to afford the pearls. But with that, we were finally ready to begin the journey through the Nether, which I assumed would be the incredibly annoying, dangerous, time-consuming, and most certainly counterproductive to the desired effect of my long list of various prescription medications, though quite luckily, I'd actually found a ruined portal in pretty good shape a bit earlier that was rather close to the village. So I decided to restore the previously mentioned portal and went through. I was then immediately greeted by a Nether fortress, which was absolutely insane. However, I also noticed the fact that our portal had been generated on top of a small platform suspended over a sea of lava, which was less than optimal. So I went back through the portal with the plan of walking in the direction of the Nether fortress in the overworld, so that I would hopefully have the portal generate in or on top of the fortress. And with that master plan in mind, I started our journey to find a lava pool in the direction towards the Nether fortress. This was actually pretty easy, as we found one almost immediately. So I started making the portal. At this point, I wasn't entirely sure if this plan was exceptionally smart or dumb. If we did spawn on top of the Nether fortress, we'd run the high risk of receiving a clapping of biblical proportions by either wither skeletons, blazes, or a combination of both. But at the same time, if we spawn on top of the Nether fortress, we wouldn't have to traverse a bunch of terrain to get to one, meaning that we could completely negate the clapping which piglins and ghasts are capable of providing. But nonetheless, I lit the portal and made my way through, and just as planned, I had successfully generated our portal on top of the Nether fortress. Some of you might be surprised that I actually managed to pull this off and didn't die in a rather underwhelming, avoidable and dunce-like fashion. And my response to that is that I'm just as surprised as you are. But now that I had successfully infiltrated the property of people who had done me absolutely no harm, I commenced with a good old-fashioned burglary. I started off by blocking off all entrances to where I was standing in hopes of avoiding a less than welcome surprise from behind by a tall and imposing man. I decided to grab some netherwort, as I intended to brew a bunch of potions in the near future. From there, I continued checking their chests to see if they had anything steel-worthy and blocking off all corridors for the skeletons as I went along, but was sorely disappointed by their belongings. However, it didn't take long before I noticed a blaze in one of the corridors, which was definitely not optimal, and as I tried peeking, I was surprised by yet another blaze from behind, who seemed to have a somewhat different idea for the use of his rod than what I was thinking of, but due to some absolute miracle, I somehow managed to survive. So I started peeking this new blaze as well, and managed to take it out. However, I managed to fall into the soul sand with the netherwort, and was, of course, attacked by a skeleton, but somehow managed to cheat death yet again. Then we had yet another miracle happen, as I decided to learn from that near-death experience and blocked off the corridor behind me completely. I was then tasked with taking out all blazes and wither skeletons without hitting any zombified piglins, as that would mean that I would most certainly die. And as I found my way out of the incredibly underwhelming treasure part of the fortress, I was immediately greeted with a blaze spawner. Though there was a major issue I ran into. The blaze spawner had apparently become a playground for zombified piglins, as they were just chilling there for no reason. So I ignored that and hoped that they would just despawn, and left to go and grab some blocks that I could use to build a small safe area as yet another anti-clap measure. But as I was collecting blocks, I noticed that the piglins were attracted to me personally, as they would literally follow me and get in the boats I placed for my pig and rub up against me, making sure that I couldn't do anything. But after having maneuvered around in a very elegant manner, I managed to get the previously mentioned anti-clapping measure in place. However, one of the zombified piglins really loved to stand in the middle of the blaze spawner cage, meaning that every shot I would take with my bow would risk angering all of the zombified piglins. So I tried checking if there was another spawner, but ran into a corridor filled with lava. But luckily, the piglins seemed to have despawned when I checked again, meaning that we could finally commence with our for-profit genocide. However, as I was carrying out the previously mentioned illegal activities, my pig somehow managed to get shot, which was rather inconvenient. So after having killed a fair few, I had to pearl in to grab all of the rods, but For some reason, the game decided to spawn in yet another wave of blazes. With that, I waited for their attacks to go on cooldown and broke the spawner, as those kinds of surprises tend to be rather unpleasant. And once I had picked up all of the blaze rods, we had a grand total of 12 pieces, which was most certainly more than enough. So after a well-needed change of underwear, I used the obsidian we had acquired earlier in a very moral and legal manner and built a portal right where I was standing. Once we had successfully returned to the overworld with our stolen goods, my first priority was to grab another pig against which we could inflict physical trauma by riding it for several kilometers without any breaks. I then did just that with the goal of locating yet another village. The plan from here was to brew 2 different types of potions, which were invisibility as well as speed. The invisibility potions were for the mobs that we might run into in the stronghold itself, as well as the Endermen once we get to the end, as you actually don't anger Endermen by staring at them if you're invisible. And to all of you wondering, no, I most definitely did not know this and had to test it in a creative testing world to see if that was the case. And I also wanted speed, as I'm essentially going to need my pig with a carrot on a stick to outrun a literal dragon as well as its attacks. The speed potions were really straightforward, as all that was needed was nether wart, sugar, gunpowder, and redstone dust, all of which, apart from gunpowder, are really easy to obtain. However, the invisibility potions were a bit more annoying, as I had to use a piece of nether wart, golden carrot, fermented spider eye, as well as glowstone or redstone dust. The main issue there was the spider eyes, as I would have to kill a bunch of spiders to obtain them, where only 1 in every 3 would drop them. But once I had spent several nights gathering materials, I had all of the potions ready, meaning that we were ready to go to the stronghold. So began what would possibly be our last journey in this world, where I was expecting me and my less than hygienic friend to save the world, and we were of course going to achieve this by killing a dragon who hadn't harmed or destroyed anything or anyone, and had just lived its life peacefully in a completely different dimension. And this journey was actually not that bad, but we did run into an issue as I was mining down, as I had dug straight into a seemingly rather large cave, so I made the executive decision to go a few blocks to the side and start digging there instead. And this actually worked, meaning that we had successfully located the stronghold. I then fetched my mighty steed and infiltrated the moist basement, to in turn look for the portal room. Once located, I made some final preparations, activated the portal, and jumped through. I then spawned in a box, which was rather convenient in terms of my chances of not getting severely clapped, but it did mean that I had to dig myself out in a way that is almost as awkward as I am when in close proximity to females. Then began an equally awkward dragon fight. I was then showered by the dragon's balls once more, which was surprisingly fulfilling, which was really quite interesting, as I'm usually empty inside. All that was left at that point was to steal its supposedly only offspring and jump into the portal, officially ending the challenge. So there we have it. I beat Minecraft Hardcore without walking. I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I did. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and let me know if there are any challenges you would like to see me take on. And yet another massive thank you to Matty for the idea for this video. But anyways, I'll see you in the next one.